In the past few chapters, we have finally gotten our first real insight into the workings of Juventus and the philosophy of its master, Mark Snuffy. And with that, I felt like it's a good time to discuss what is being set up and how Isagi's third match fits into the overall structure and themes of the Neo Egoist League arc. And just to be clear, I am sticking with the real-world team names. So when I say Juventus, I'm referring to the team that's called Ubers in Blue Lock. In my view, all the material that we've seen over the past 10 or so chapters serves to establish the central theme of the match between Bayern Munchen and Juventus. What does it mean to become a professional football player? Hello, my name is Sean, and it's time to discuss my views on the most recent Blue Lock chapters. The theme of professionalism is really pertinent at this moment in the story. But to understand why, it's important to zoom out a bit and reassess how we have gotten to this moment. The Neo Egoist League is the point where the Blue Lock players start their transition from amateur high school players to the world of professional football. They join established teams and receive real offers from professional clubs based on their performance. This new environment also comes with new difficulties. Each team has a pre-existing culture and strategies, and the Blue Lock players have to carve out a place for themselves within their new club. This is really the main concern of the first match of the arc, that between Bayern Munchen, which is a team that Blue Lock's protagonist Yuichi Isagi decided to join, and Barcelona. This match is all about establishing two key ideas: that differences in style of play really do matter, and that you can't just elbow your way into an established system. And on a structural level, BM versus Barcelona sets up the arc's overarching conflict between Isagi and Bayern's ace, Michael Kaiser, and establishes the terms on which they will be competing. In the match against Barcelona, we're shown how Isagi struggles to fit into his new team. BM has a strategy that works, one that seems to allow no space for newcomers. So when Isagi and his fellow Blue Lock player, Rensuke Kunigami, try to muscle their way into prominence, their efforts fail to produce results and earn them the ire of the Bayern players. All this is put into stark contrast with how Isagi's best friend Bachira is actively flourishing within the Spanish football culture that he joins. In other words, the story is asking if Isagi might have made a mistake in selecting the German team. And so, Isagi's major victory at the end of the match is proving that there's light at the end of the tunnel. He and Kunigami succeed in scoring a goal in place of Kaiser, and so they prove their worth to Bayern's coach. And more than that, they surpass Barcelona's most prominent player in the process. Bachira first seems to have the upper hand by assimilating into his new environment, but he's ultimately overcome by players who dare to crack an existing system apart. The next step for the Blue Lock players is to bridge the gap between them and their foreign rivals. And so, it's highly significant that Bayern is now pitted against the team that most heavily focuses on improving its players' physical and technical abilities. Manchester's coach is all about developing a physique that complements one's playstyle, and more broadly, about offering each player an upgrade that is tailored to their individual skill sets. But in the end, Isagi surpasses all the Manchester players by unlocking a far greater upgrade: the spectacular metavision, which vastly improves his already impressive spatial awareness. But perhaps even more importantly, he also gets a philosophical breakthrough that lets him outwit his opponent. By the end of the match, Isagi's victory proves that Manchester had its priorities all mixed up. Technical improvements may be nice, but in the grand scheme of things, they matter far less than the depths of one's ego. So now we've reached the third match in the Neo Egoist League, and from the very start, the manga communicates that it's done focusing on the Blue Lock players' physical improvements. In a completely unprecedented development for this series, Isagi compensated for his biggest shortcoming before the match even started, and reveals his new left-legged shot in the first few minutes of the game. And more than that, this new ability is revealed exactly when his teammate Ness tries to exploit Isagi's physical shortcomings that were put on full display in the previous match. With all this, we're basically told that Isagi has now caught up to the level necessary to compete with the foreign stars. And this is celebrated by having him score his first ever goal in the Neo Egoist League. So, with all this in mind, it's time to look at the actual ideas that the match between Bayern Munchen and Juventus seems to be setting up. With this match, we have reached the second half of the Neo Egoist League arc. There's one more game left for Isagi's team after this one. And with that, I get the sense that the arc might thematically be split into two halves. The first two matches are all about catching the Blue Lock players up to a professional standard, and from there, the second half might be looking forward to their imminent professional careers. This is most explicitly flagged by the flashback to the first interaction between Juventus's coach, Mark Snuffy, and his new recruits. Snuffy here asks what football means to them. But when the Blue Lock players proclaim that becoming professional football players is their dream, Snuffy paints this as the mindset of an amateur. For him, what distinguishes pros from amateurs is that they treat football as a job, as a means to put bread on the table. This moment in chapter 214 really made a lot of pieces click into place for me. It showed that on a thematic level, this match is set up to explore what kind of mentality you need to become a pro. This is also why the chapters since the end of the Manchester match really push the material benefits of going pro into the foreground. Most notable here is the case of Kenya Yukimura. Before joining the Blue Lock program, he contracted an incurable eyesight condition and thought that his career of going pro was lost for good. But after his performance against Manchester, he receives an offer from a professional club that will pay for his entire treatment. This ray of hope comes at the point of the story where the doors to the world of professional football are starting to open up for the Blue Lock players. And with that, Yukimura can start looking forward for the first time in ages. We're shown a similar situation with Juventus' star defender, Don Lorenzo. Lorenzo was abandoned as a child and grew up on the streets. But everything changed when Mark Snuffy lifted him out of poverty by turning him into a football player. This rags to riches story is most powerfully symbolized by Lorenzo's golden teeth. Snuffy replaced the urchin's rotten teeth with a set of golden dentures. There could have hardly been any better way to symbolize his fresh start inside the world of football than with such a display of opulence. And last but not least, of course, there's Mark Snuffy and his best friend, who both succumbed to a life of luxury after they became superstars. All these stories serve to illustrate how radically one's life is turned upside down by going pro. I actually just put out a whole video on the significance of money in Blue Lock, so go check that out as well if you want some further thoughts on the topic. Once I realized that going pro and having a professional mindset might be the central concern of the Juventus match, two scenes from the chapters directly preceding it suddenly started taking on much greater significance. First of all, we get a flashback to the childhood of Yohiyori, one of Isagi's teammates. Here, we discover that Hiyori's parents are completely obsessed with turning their son into a football star. As a result, Hiyori embraces his place in Blue Lock as a way out, a means to escape from the oppressive atmosphere back at home. In essence, he's in Blue Lock exactly because he does not want to pursue a career in football. So with Hiyori, the manga is presenting us with basically someone whose mindset is diametrically opposed to that of a pro. Blue Lock is setting up one of the Bayern players as a foil to the exact qualities that Snuffy prioritizes over everything else in his team. And I find it highly likely that this won't end well for Hiyori. And talking about moments that look forward to the Blue Lock players' professional careers, we get a scene between two Manchester players, Real Mikage and Seishiro Nagi. Real suggests to Nagi that he should use the Neo Egoist League to net in an astronomically high offer so that he can quickly cash out and never have to work again. I made a whole video about the Real and Nagi situation that you all seem to have liked quite a bit, so I don't want to repeat myself here too much. Long story short, there's a lot to suggest that Nagi is set up for a massive fall from grace in the foreseeable future. And that seems even more likely with the focus on professionalism in the recent chapters. Snuffy claims that he too once coasted on his natural talents, but then he started basking in a life of luxury and neglecting his training, and he swiftly suffered the consequences. All of this should serve as a massive cautionary tale for the poster child of cruising on your talents alone. So, the Juventus match is prefigured by two clear-cut examples of players who are not acting like professionals, followed by Juventus's coach unveiling the quality that is at stake here. And with all this, it's hard not to consider the implications on the actual match. From the start, the manga establishes a powerful contrast between the two teams. The Bayern players are far from a professional, cohesive whole. Their team is effectively split into two factions, one that revolves around Isagi and another that revolves around Michael Kaiser. And these two are actively sabotaging each other to the point that they risk hampering their team's actual performance. This is put into even further relief by the contrast between Bayern's internal discord and their opponents. Snuffy has transformed a set of unruly egoists into a highly coordinated team. From Bayern's perspective, the Juventus players act as if they're all part of a single organism. Most impressively of all, Snuffy has managed to rein in Blue Lock's most dysfunctional player, Shouei Barou. In the earlier Blue Lock selections, Barou had crowned himself king of the field and demanded absolute obedience from his teammates. He was self-centered to such an extreme degree that he even refused to pass to his teammates, since he'd never relinquish a goal to another player. In many ways, Barou represents the most unfettered form of egoism in the series. Yet, Snuffy inspired him to properly cooperate with his team. we see how Barou has started to pass and everything. Moreover, Barou's new mindset, ironically enough, gives him exactly what he wanted all this time. His desire was always to score every goal, but up to this point, he was shooting himself in the foot with his self-centered playstyle. But now, he has finally started to act like a professional player, and as a result, he is now able to serve as the center of his entire team. Barou has left behind his amateurish mindset, and he's flourishing as a result. In other words, the new Shouei Barou really puts Bayern's internal issues into relief. What's especially noteworthy on this front is that the highly coordinated Juventus team is not all that different from Bayern Munchen at the start of the arc. When Isagi and his fellow Blue Lock players joined the Germans, they found a hyper-rational team centered around supporting one incredible striker. I actually talked about the parallels between Kaiser and Barou in my first Blue Lock video, and this seems to have become more relevant than ever. At this point, we're asked if Bayern's new direction, from a well-oiled machine to embracing chaotic egoism, might not be one step forwards, but two steps backwards. And more than that, by showing that even someone like Barou can rein in the worst parts of his ego, it seems more pertinent than ever that Isagi and Kaiser finally get their act together. I claimed at the start of this match that there's a lot to suggest that it won't end well for Isagi and his teammates. I actually became even more certain of this after Isagi scored his first goal of the arc within only a few chapters. Blue Lock has a general trend of subverting our expectations. When we think that the protagonists are gonna win, they lose. But when all the odds are stacked against them, they pull through in the very end. The second selection in particular offers a few noteworthy precedents for Isagi's recent success. He's the one to score the first goal of the arc, after which his team gets crushed without mercy by Blue Lock's number 1, Rin Itoshi. And when Isagi's team regroups and issues a rematch against Rin, they're once again the ones to score the first goal. And then, once again, they fall short in the face of Blue Lock's top players. This alone suggests that Isagi is fated for a monumental loss here as well. More significant, however, is that a loss at this point of the story would be very thematically appropriate. If the third quarter of the arc indeed revolves around the issue of professionalism, it's hard to imagine that Bayern will gain the edge over its highly streamlined rivals as long as the internal strife persists. Then there's the whole Hiyori situation, a massive Chekhov's gun just waiting to go off at a critical moment. Moreover, if the third match serves as a low point, there might be a bit of a parallelism planned between the two halves of the arc. First and third matches highlight the Blue Lock players' struggles and shortcomings, whereas the second and fourth matches present them with major moments of growth. Now, there's one other idea that's been pushed heavily, which is the importance of Bayern's players winning their 1v1s. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure yet how this fits into the picture. I could see it going in two ways. Either that BM fails to single out its opponents as long as they can't act as a cohesive whole, or that this is another light at the end of the tunnel situation. Isagi could have a small breakthrough at the end that will help put him on even footing with his opponents in the final match of the arc. And then there's a bit of bookkeeping to do. I claimed in my first Blue Lock video that a physical upgrade for Isagi was in the cards. So I was right on that front at least, even if I no longer think that this will be a central concern going forwards. But then I'll also be taking a certified Suze L for being completely wrong on the nature of his upgrades. And I'll shout out Nat Upayokin for calling the lefty shot in my comments. Well done there. So that's basically where I think the Juventus match is heading, but I'd love to hear about your expectations in the comments. Also, I'll definitely be sharing my thoughts on the current developments in Blue Lock, so consider subscribing for that and other in-depth manga analysis every other week.